Welcome, welcome. How's everyone doing in the
Great.
of YouTube? So how you doing, Kim? How you doing?
I'm here. I'm hanging. Um, interested in having this discussion on the COVID-19 vaccine. If the viewing audience is anything like me, they've got more questions and answers. So hopefully we'll figure some of that out tonight.
Definitely. And obviously, to I guess my right, depends on which of the thing you're probably looking at, is our guest and wonderful person. Very going to be a very informative discussion today regarding vaccines. But I'd like to introduce a brother, a fellow brother of ours and mine, Keidi Awadu. How you doing today, Keidi?
I say greetings to you, my brother, Umoya. I am doing fantastic, or as we like to say, we black and we shine. It's a pleasure to be with you and to meet you as well, Kim.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you as always, Keidi, for your wonderful blessings and information tonight. So, Kim, do you mind putting up that flyer once again? I'm sorry, not the flyer, but the okay.
This
So,
here.
yeah, that's fine. We'll go to the shows and then we'll go back. I want to read Keiti's bio as well, but we'll go back to that after this. So, we had a great discussion with Key Matthews last week regarding housing. So, if you have a chance, definitely go on to uh, the YouTube page and check that out. It's great information. We also on the 17th, the Electoral College, and shout out to Rita Forte with Lenice Jones, and we went through the Electoral College process. So if you have a chance, go check that out as well on the channel and Rita's channel as well. And today we have the topic of vaccines with special guest Keidi. And we also were supposed to have Dr. Cofer on today, but it looks like she was not able to make it. But we definitely, in the future, if she is available, would love to have her on the program.
And
And
I did just receive a message that she was finishing up a meeting, so she is going to try to jump on at some point.
great, perfect, perfect. So we'll definitely read Keidi's bio and her bio, and would love to get Dr. Flo. Oh, as a matter of fact, I think Dr. Flo is in the building. So let's bring her to the studio here. Okay, I think she is in the building. So, and then the 29th, the 2020 wrap up with our community call, which usually starts at 9 o'clock. But today we have a special time at 6 o'clock. So we will be doing that program at 9 o'clock. All right. So we definitely have Dr. Cofer in the house. So Kim, all right. First of all, can we go back to all four of us, Kim, so we can introduce Dr. Flo. Hey, Dr. Flo, thanks for coming through.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Appreciate it. So I guess we want to before we get into things, I guess we should introduce ourselves. My name is Moya, part of the AWCA media team. This is Kim, and then we have
Hi.
Hi,
spe-
Kim.
special panel, yourself, Dr. Kofer, and Keidi Awadu.
Greetings.
Yes. Now, Dr. Kofer, how do you pronounce your first name?
Flojaune.
Flojaune. Okay. What origin is that from?
It is a combination of my grandparents' names, Florence and John.
Nice.
That's very pretty.
Okay.
Thank you. It means yellow flower in French.
Nice. Yellow flower. Okay. Well, it seems like we have some unique names on this platform right now. So
Indeed.
it's a good thing. Okay. So let's, I guess, Kim, if you don't mind putting up the bios here. Okay. So Keidi Obi Awadu. Keidi is an author of 28 books and international lecturer on health, economics, culture, and the humanities. He is an award-winning master chef of raw vegan and vegetarian cuisine and creator of the Living Superfood brand. He continues to be a multimedia journalist spanning over 39 years in print, broadcast, and now an internet webcast pioneer. Before embarking on his career in health, Keidi gained experience as a reproductive biology cryogenics technician. All right, so Dr. Flojaune Griffin Cofer is an epidemiologist who serves as the Senior Director of Policy for Public Health Advocates. She oversees the state policy efforts in the All Children Thrive California Local Trauma Policy Initiative. Her professional interest is addressing emerging and persistent public health challenges through research and policy. Her work primarily focuses on metabolic disease prevention, restorative justice, and adverse childhood experiences.
All right, before we get into the discussion, I'm just going to throw up this little disclaimer. The following program is for informational purposes only. Please refer to your healthcare physician or healthcare provider regarding any medical advice. Please talk to a licensed professional if you're experiencing any COVID-related symptoms or have questions.
All right. So before we actually get into some of the topics in the slides, I wanted to know from both, I don't know, Dr. Cofer, if you wanted to further elaborate on, what you do, what you're interested in, and then Keidi, if you also want to further elaborate. I know I read your bio, but there might be some information that we missed. So Dr. Cofer?
I don't think you missed anything. I am an epidemiologist, which is just the study of how diseases move through populations. So this year has been, a pretty eventful one because we spent a lot of it, explaining to people exactly what a novel virus is, how, vaccines are developed, things that we should be, concerned about. And also, just making sure that people have baseline information about what's happening, and also enough information to be able to make their own decisions. So I come just in the spirit of public health and wanting to make sure that people have enough information to be able to make informed decisions, emphasis on informed. But I believe in all things that consent is sexy. And so therefore people should be able to do what, works best for them and what's in the best interest of their own, values and decisions.
All right, Keidi.
Yes, you did mention I am the author of 28 books, when in actuality, I'm the author of 38 books. In fact, I've had 4 new books, 3 science-based books come out just this year, so it has been quite a challenging and stimulating year. I am the author of 3 books, actually 4 books on vaccinations so far, and I'm currently writing another paper for peer review. This year has been extraordinary. The impact of this global COVID-19 novel coronavirus pandemic on human health has created an unprecedented effort to deploy numerous vaccines to combat the epidemic. With more than 50 COVID-19 vaccine candidates in trials worldwide, there remains a concern that the standardization of COVID-19 research and tools is inadequate for such a momentous endeavor. So I'll give you the title of the paper I'm currently writing. Monoclonal antibody immune therapy introduces risk of mutation of novel zoonotic RNA virus species. Unintended consequences of the enhanced function of COVID-19 and mass vaccination. So hopefully we'll get a chance to dive into this document. It is brand new. I'm doing a lot of research on this every day. I'm really excited about what we have to present to the world.
All right. It's going to be a good discussion today, very informative, and we definitely appreciate you, Dr. Cofer and Keidi, for joining this wonderful panel discussion. All right, so the first, let's go to that. Okay, so we have a couple of definitions up here that I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with, but I'm sure Dr. Cofer and Keidi are probably familiar with these. Just to give a little context before we actually talk about COVID-19 and what that particular virus is, I guess let's start with what is a virus? I guess, I don't know, Dr. Cofer, if you want to, explain what a virus is, and then Keidi, if you also want to elaborate on what a virus is as well.
Sure. So we typically talk about infections being in a few categories, and one is a bacterial infection and one is a viral infection. And essentially, bacteria are these really tiny little like microorganisms. They're made up of a single cell, and there are many different types of them, and they can have a lot of different features, and they can live almost anywhere. So there are, no matter how clean you perceive yourself to be, there are bacteria around, and many of them are quite healthy. The challenge sometimes is when too many of the bacteria build up, or certain types of bacteria can be really harmful depending on what they are and how many of them you have. So examples of that throughout our body are, for example, women have yeast in their vaginal areas, and there are good healthy bacteria there. But if you get an overgrowth of yeast, you develop what we call a yeast infection, and that's a bad thing. So it's not the presence or absence of certain types of bacteria, but it can also be just the amount. Whereas viruses are another type of same, tiny microorganism, but they're much smaller than bacteria. But they're similarly diverse, and they can take on lots of shapes and features, but they're parasitic. So they actually require living cells or tissue to grow. So they can't just exist on inanimate objects. And so they essentially divide once they find a host, and sometimes they even kill their host as part of their own life cycle. And so that's really kind of the difference between viruses and bacteria.
Okay. Keidi, do you have any you want to interject at all as well?
Well, I have the most simple answer to that simple 4-letter question. What is a virus? Or 4-word question. What is a virus? Simple strands of DNA covered by a lipid protein sheath. Now, of course, that in itself invites a lot of other things. It invites the question, is a virus alive? Well, when you have simple strands of DNA, there's absolutely not enough structure to be alive. In fact, when we asked the question in the book, Panic, when we asked the question, what is a virus? And I cited 10 peer-reviewed sources, one doctor put forward that viruses violate all 7 of the criteria for something being called alive. So there are other definitions of a virus. Dr. Laila Africa said a virus is nothing but a piece of a dead, broken up cell. Others have said that viruses are cellular debris left over from the process called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And some have even said a virus is indistinguishable from an exosome, which is a normal function called an extracellular vesicle by which cells communicate with other cells in the body. So what is a virus? A virus is different things according to who you are talking to. But a very clear, definitive definition, simple strands of DNA covered by a lipid protein sheath.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say, Dr. Cofer, at this time regarding the virus, or
no?
Is that pretty much okay? All right. Well, thank you both for those wonderful definitions. I guess let's talk about the immune system. What is the immune system?
Sure. So I like to describe things in a way, and I think maybe Keidi and I will be able to be good about this, because I'm going to describe things in a way that hopefully people who are not even particularly well versed in science can be able to understand. And then for those who want to do a deeper dive, Keidi can come behind me and explain in more detail. But I always describe the immune system as the body's defense and protection system. So the immune system is there to be able to make sure that when we encounter, threats, that we're able to fight them off. And often those threats come in the form of viruses. And so when we encounter those viruses, our bodies are able to launch an immune response so that they don't take over. And especially those viruses that can cause cell death, that they don't cause so much damage that we don't continue to live long enough. What I like to say is to propagate the species, right? So we are trying to stay alive long enough so that we can procreate, so that there will be more of us and that we don't go extinct. And so our immune system operates as our defense system for that. And so there are different parts of the immune system that basically roam around and kind of are on patrol throughout our bodies, and are looking for things that they perceive to be dangerous. And when they find something, they launch an immune response. And often the things that we experience as symptoms of a virus are actually our immune response trying to protect us. So when you experience a fever or a runny nose, all of the kind of symptoms we think of being sick are actually symptoms of the response of our immune system responding to and trying to keep us healthy. And so that's why we call them symptoms, because they are some of the telltale signs that your body may be fighting off an infection on your behalf. And so as much as those symptoms are things we want to avoid, they actually are a sign that our immune system is working well when we experience those symptoms, because it means that it's functioning and that it's fighting off something that we shouldn't be encountering in the first place.
Okay, Keidi?
She did a very good explanation. I, of course, have such detailed research on these things. When talking about immune system, I could go into reverse oxygen species, free radicals, oxidative stress, and these other type of things. I think that Dr. Flo did a very good job. I would just add to it that the immune system is one of 15 integrated body systems that we've identified and we've studied. The key for people to have to understand is that your immune system works in collaboration, in partnership with all the other systems of the body. So if the pulmonary system, the cardiovascular system, the eliminative system, if any of these other systems are out of order, the immune system, because it is such a rapid functioning system in the body, one of the major utilizers of energy in the body, the immune system is at the same time extremely durable and at the same time fragile to disruptions and stressors that would impact our body and create injury of some sort of some sense, which we call pathogenesis. So in most cases, the body's immune system responds to these environmental stressors by creating inflammation. And this is a very important point. As we know about Dr. Sebi, Dr. Alfredo Bowen said, all diseases were caused by mucus. Well, in actuality, to be more technically correct, most diseases, some 200 identified, have acute or chronic inflammation at their base. And this inflammation stresses the immune system and requires a lot of energy for the body to manage.
Okay. All right. So we have a couple other definitions up here that we might want to go through. Long haulers. I know Kim, she mentioned, she came up to me and said, you know what a long hauler is, regarding this, the current.
I've heard it discussed on some radio programs as people who have contracted the virus and they either recovered, but they still have residual symptoms that linger on. My question, and we might get into this later in the show, but where are the people who have recovered from the virus on the priority list as far as this vaccine is concerned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if we want to do this during definitions or you want to save it for later, but you described long haulers perfectly. They're people who have experienced, the infection and I think we're going to describe the difference between SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. And the basic difference, to just be really simplistic, is that you'll hear people refer to it as SARS-CoV-2 or severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. It's because it's the second one that has had this particular some commonalities with SARS-CoV, which was the first one that was experienced there. And it's the virus that causes COVID-19, which is the disease. And so that's the difference between the two. The virus is SARS-CoV-2, the disease is COVID-19. And so we've been talking a lot about COVID-19, but that's the difference. And so for people who've been infected with the virus and developed the disease, some people seem to recover recover fairly quickly and kind of go back to what we would describe as normal. And other people continue to have their symptoms for a longer period of time. That can come from just a prolonged immune response to it, or there could be long-term damage that is caused to some people from having had the virus and having had the disease. And because it is so new, we're still learning about the long haulers, namely, how long is a long haul? Does this last months? Will this last for years? Is this permanent damage? Like some of those things we simply don't know because the virus hasn't been around that long. And so that's where the name long haulers comes from. And that's kind of how they fit into what we understand about the disease.
Okay. So Keidi, do you have anything to interject in terms of?
I have never used the term long haulers, so I'll just pass on that. When it comes to long-term immunodefenses, acquired immune efficiencies, I have written and talked about that extensively. As you know, Umoya, with the series of interviews you and I have done regarding my nutritional program, that's the way I live. I have created a system by which I have fortified my immune system to, if you could say 100%, I'd say 100%. If you would have to say 99.995%, I'll say that. But I declared in July 2019 that I was literally going to go through the entire decade of 2020s without getting sick one time, not even a cold. And so I'm sticking to that pledge. So I guess I'm a long hauler.
All right.
I was like, I don't think that's a long hauler in this instance. People who did get sick, not people who didn't.
Or won't. I won't. I refuse to get sick.
There you go. So I guess, Keidi, did you have anything in terms of, I know Dr. Flo did a great job in terms of distinguishing between the coronavirus 2 and COVID-19. Did you have anything to elaborate on that, or should
this is a very problematic area for me. I began researching HIV/AIDS in the mid-1980s, and we saw the spectrum of name changes for what was essentially the same pathogenic condition blamed upon an infectious virus. There were a lot of problems that came up with that. The first definition of it as HTLV3, Dr. Robert Gallo's claim, which was at the beginning he was laughed by other retrovirologists for making the claim that retroviruses would cause such devastating diseases. During the course of studying HIV/AIDS, I learned a lot about peer review scientific research, and that there is always a great deal of dissent within the scientific research community. I am essentially, as you know, Brother Umoya, I am a dissenter, but I am a dissenter with a little different take on it. I research to an incredible amount of depth, and I say to everybody, I want you to validate everything that I say. When I write, I publish multiple sources for everything I say, especially if it's contradictory to what the mainstream is saying. And in this particular case, we can find a significant amount of science-based, peer review-based dissent from the current strategies of the pandemic. But unfortunately, very little of that dissent is making it through to the public because the filters have been put on to only tell one story of what is this novel COVID-19. It itself has gone through numerous name changes. And what is the difference between it and the first severe acute respiratory syndrome, which when that one came out, I was saying, but severe acute respiratory syndrome, isn't that what we almost always call pneumonia? Severe acute lower respiratory syndrome. So I'm a bit on the edge when I'm listening to people talk about COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, and I start listening very, very closely, kind of to where are they going to slip up, where I can say, you missed on that point.
Yeah, because it seems like it's, as Dr. Flo said, it's relatively new. So it seems like there needs to be more science based on this, right?
The science on coronavirus has been around since about 1965. So we have about 65 years of this science. In my book, Panic, I do list some 19 different coronaviruses said to have become pathogenic And some of these, 7 of these, are said to affect humans, as well as a number of different animal coronaviruses. What makes it really interesting in the current paper that I'm writing, we talk about 2 of the animal coronaviruses that have been studied. One is actually mouse hepatic virus, MHV is what it's called. And the other was rat coronavirus. We have those in the literature. We've done a lot of study. One of the current questions that should be asked and should be really seriously asked is the inclusion of what they call them monoclonal antibodies that are derived from mouse blood plasma. Does that run the risk of triggering another zoonotic species to come out of the vaccination process? The risk is much, much greater than what people want to imagine. And I've got a set of documents dating back 2 decades showing how scientists have always known about this risk of monoclonal antibodies and the unintended consequences when these things recirculate through a species as many as 9 times. They do acquire mutations through each circulation, and the accumulation of these mutations can become very, very dangerous.
Okay, well, speaking of vaccines, I guess, Dr. Flo, what is the definition of a vaccine?
So a vaccine, very simply put, is a way to be able to help your body launch an immune system, an immune response that is small enough so that your body says, oh, when I encounter that in the future, I will be able to, I've developed antibodies against it, so I'm able to launch a more effective immune response. So that's why we call it a vaccine. There are lots of ways that our bodies, though, and we think about that as something that's been administered to people, but you also develop antibodies from experiencing a disease itself. You also can just the exposures you have throughout your life. So if you were a child, you had a certain virus, you will develop antibodies for that virus over time without actually having been immunized. But getting a vaccine is a way to be able to do that artificially. So it's forcing your body to launch an immune response in advance, so that in hopes that when it encounters that virus again in the future, you already have antibodies developed to be able to fight it off, and you won't actually succumb to the virus.
Okay.
To touch on that point of developing, organic immune system, a lot of talk in the beginning with this hyper use of, sanitizing your hands, over sanitizing. Some people were saying that could be bad for you or negative because you aren't getting the natural antibodies and you're just warding off anything that could help build your immune system organically.
Yeah, there have been some conversations, about it's like the hygiene theory that people are more likely to get sick if we reduce their exposure, especially early on in their lives, to some of the things that are likely to be in their environment, that we don't actually allow them to build up the immunity. That's true to a certain extent, but it also can be untrue in others, right? So keeping things clean is helpful. It's one of the reasons why we've decreased the number of people who die from foodborne illness, and during routine medical procedures and things like that. Like cleanliness is important when it comes to that, and so hygiene is really helpful in preventing infections and things like that. The other side of that, though, is that you can't overcorrect, and so I would say for most of us, we're probably not anywhere near that overcorrection, but we do have to think certainly about some of the ways in which our overconsumption of antibiotics, for example, and things like that can certainly cause like the multiple resistant strains so you probably heard of MRSA in the past, and that will often go through hospital and healthcare systems. So there are some ways where maybe us being a bit fastidious has caused us to have other consequences from that. But generally speaking, if you're washing your hands with cleaning yourself with alcohol-based products, or washing your hands with soap, provided that it's not antibacterial soap, you're not at high risk of causing any long-term damage. But you do want to be mindful of that balance between making sure that you're exposed so that you can develop a healthy immune system, and also making sure you're protected from things that could kill you in the process or could significantly harm you.
Okay. We have a couple more definitions here before we continue, and maybe just one more, and then we'll move on. Because I think the family's probably familiar with what a disease is. But can we talk about herd immunity? Like, what is herd immunity, and how is that significant in terms of this new coronavirus? I don't know.
Sure. And I was like, Keidi, feel free if you want to hop in here as well. I've been doing kind of simple definitions. So herd immunity, we often think of as when we have a certain amount of the population that has already experienced a virus or has been immunized, and therefore it makes it so that the herd or the group is able to take on a greater immunity than would have been possible if we were just talking about individual people. So the best example I can give of this is, let's say we were meeting in person and we had 10 people there. And let's say 7 of us were already immune from varicella, which is chickenpox, right? And so if somebody showed up to that party who had chickenpox, and 7 of us have either been vaccinated or already had chickenpox and have antibodies, it's going to be really hard to start an outbreak because there are at most 3 people who might be susceptible to the virus. But if none of us had ever had chickenpox and none of us had ever had a vaccine, then you now have 10 people who potentially could get infected because that one person showed up. And then if we all go home and we go home to families who, again, haven't been immunized or haven't had chickenpox, we now can spread it to them. And then we go off to work. And like I'm thinking, pre-COVID times when we were doing a lot more things in person, it can spread really quickly. And so the goal is to have a lot of people who have either already experienced the virus and have antibodies or have been vaccinated, so that you can't spread the virus quite as quickly through the population. And so it stops because it immediately, that infectious person immediately runs into people who are not in the risk pool for developing for contracting the virus. And so it doesn't go any farther. And so you can't have an outbreak. So that's really why, sometimes people will say, well, I don't believe in vaccines and you do. So what does it matter if I don't get vaccinated and you do? Well, the simple reason is that the more people who get vaccinated, the less likely we are to have outbreaks. And then you also, of course, have people who are allergic to the vaccine components or are too young to get vaccines. And so you're also helping to be able to protect a virus from being able to spread, so that those people who may be at higher risk or you can't be vaccinated can be protected. So that's essentially the idea behind herd immunity, is that we are even more protected when fewer of us are at risk.
Okay, Keidi.
Mm-hmm. Herd immunity is one of these terminology used by the field of epidemiology. I don't like it. I don't like the term. For one, I think it degrades our humanity, that, we're being called a herd. But in actuality, instead of using the term herd immunity, I just use the term generalized immunity. Human beings are exposed to so many pathogens, so many bacterial spores on a constant basis, every day, every minute of every day. There was a report that I first encountered it in Science Daily publication, and then later found the source material of a set of studies that have been done in Spain with researchers from the United States, Canada, and Spain, that set up a testing site or a collection site on a mountain in Spain, collecting the viruses that fell out of the atmosphere on a daily basis. Most people are unaware, but there are quadrillions of viruses that are airborne. And according to the results of this study, they made the claim, and it was published in peer-reviewed literature, that on every square meter of Earth's surface, some 800 million viruses fall out of the sky every day. So generalized immunity is why all of us don't get sick from 800 million or however many different species of viruses would be settling on the Earth's surface, why we don't get sick from that every day, bacterial spores, etc. So again, I am a dissenter in much of this, but I really don't like the terms herd immunity. I think it's debasing and degrading, and it distracts the public from what we really should be focusing on, and that is strengthening all of our functioning body systems so that we can resist the genesis of disease, the cause of disease and disorder, which we call pathogenesis.
Okay. Kim, I think maybe we should probably move on to some of the other slides, because this has been a wonderful conversation, and we're actually at the 6:30 mark. So do you want to take this away, Kim?
Okay, let's see. So in the UK and now in the US, I guess we've had the first vaccinations are rolling out. Here, the UK also just came out. They said that there's an additional strain out there. Is this vaccine going to work for the new mutant strain? Or, I mean, we could do this. This could go on forever. You know, a new strain, you need a new vaccine, or will this vaccine that's coming out now help with the mutant strains in the future?
If I could begin, since Flo has been doing such a good job cutting the wind, sometimes the goose in the V has to fly to the front and give her a break. I think that this thing that we witnessed, I believe the story first came out, was it about the 9th? No, it was later than that. It was just about 4 days ago. The first mutated species, which had been reported a few weeks ago, but now just made it into the press, appearing in the UK. And when they looked at this particular branch, they said that this is particularly aggressive at the way it was jumping out of the epidemiological chart. And the problem is, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I have forecasts due to a number of different circumstances, the use of monoclonal antibodies. There is a cross between these new monoclonal antibody therapies and CRISPR, which is a gene editing technique. And CRISPR now has produced a significant number of unintended gene edits, and that's in the literature as well. I predict the worst. I predict that in about 2 to 3 months, this issue of the mutations is going to become very, very noisy. I am further predicting, and these predictions are not appearing in the paper that I'm writing. I am further predicting that by next summer, we're going to see a newly emergent and highly aggressive airborne complication here. And we have seen in the studies of repeat circulation through a species of coronaviruses, we have seen it after 9 passes through porcine coronavirus. They said it became so aggressive that it became airborne, and it was now infecting ferrets, which are a different species. So I am predicting that if we do not put the brakes on the global COVAX program, which is run by the World Health Organization, if we don't put the brakes on it, stop and put the old controls back on this thing that pre-existed this pandemic, we're going to have a human disaster that could possibly bring up the possibility of a 6th extinction level event on planet Earth.
Wow, it's a pretty heavy prediction there.
I will say this much. All of the predictions I made about it when I published my book at the end of May, I wrote the book on coronavirus called Panic, What the Coronavirus Pandemic Tells Us About the State of the World. All of my predictions, including the significant growth in diagnoses, have all come true. And I said why in the book. I gave 15 reasons why we would see these diagnoses continue to expand very rapidly, including one of the most significant, and perhaps Dr. Flo can define this term for our audience, surveillance bias.
Yeah, so surveillance bias is essentially anytime that you are. So I often talk about this when it comes to things like autism. So people will say, "Oh, well, there's been this huge increase in the number of cases of autism, so that must be new." And I always remind people that it could be something new. It also could be that we're now testing for it, and so therefore it's not new. It's just we're now counting it. And so if you weren't testing or paying attention to it, you wouldn't recognize that that's been happening. So the same thing is true for when we first started testing for COVID-19. Obviously, you're going to have a big spike in cases because you went from not testing at all to now being able to test. And so once you get to a place where you have widespread availability of testing, then you can begin to talk more confidently about what you're observing. And so the surveillance bias is what you're capturing actually representative of the entire population of people, or are there biases in how you collected the data so that you're drawing false conclusions from it? And so that's always going to be the question that you have to keep in the back of your mind when you're evaluating any data, or how likely, how representative is the population of people who've been included in this, to be able to draw the inferences from the data that we have.
Okay. Kim, would you like to go on to the next slide? All right, cool.
So the next slide here, we have Sandra Lindsay, ICU nurse in New York, among the first people in the U.S. to get authorized coronavirus vaccine here. I think the point of this slide here is that we're seeing a lot of, Black people being the face of the vaccine in coronavirus. The first take it on the front lines seems to be a top priority to get Black people vaccinated. What do we think about that fact? They never wanted to give Black people anything first before, but now all of a sudden we're at the front of the line.
We have been at the front of a line of a lot of vaccine experiments in the past. One of my books on vaccines is entitled Outrage: How Black and Brown Babies Were Used in an LA County Vaccine Experiment. This took place between 1989 and 1991 in 3 Kaiser Permanente facilities in Los Angeles County. They were injected with an unlicensed experimental vaccine, a high-titer measles vaccine called Edmonton-Zagreb EZ vaccine. One of the biggest problems with that is that this vaccine had been used before. And in one injection or one vaccination campaign, which took place in Cameroon in the late 1980s and were reported in the British medical journal, The Lancet, it was shown that within 5 to 41 months after injection with EZ high titer measles vaccine, 13.3% of the children died of quote unquote non-specific opportunistic infection. They had these results already coming in before they brought that to Los Angeles County, and at 3 Kaiser Permanente facilities, they only injected 711 Black and Hispanic babies without their parents' permission. I met many of these families, and I traced the history of these children. It's still ongoing. We're trying to find out what became the fate of these children, because Kaiser Permanente has kept a close lid on this experiment and its long-term outcome. So many Black people are skeptical. They're always bringing up the name Tuskegee. Tuskegee, I say it again, is just the tip of the iceberg. There were far, far worse experiments, including the Fernard School study, where children who were wards of the state at the Fernard School for Children were fed radioactive oatmeal, trying to determine what would be the long-term outcome of a radiation exposure to a large population.
Wow. Well,
so yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there obviously are plenty of examples, and we could have, probably several shows just going through the examples of how the medical establishment has, experimented on Black and Indigenous and, folks in this country in particular. I mean, even the entire field of obstetrics and gynecology was done, without consent, and quite painfully experimenting on the bodies of Black women and Indigenous women. So definitely that has happened throughout time. There's, a lot of documentation and substantiation of that having happened. That also having been said, I think that, there is a debt certainly that's owed in particular to people in this country who, have been harmed by racist practices and racist institutions to be able to provide care. And so I am personally of the belief that care starts long before you come and start trying to talk about a vaccine with people. It comes with thinking about where people live. Part of the reason why I do the work that I do in public health is thinking about, do we have air justice? Are we breathing in quality air that is healthy healthy for us? Do we have water justice? Is the water that we're drinking and have access to clean and potable and safe for our communities? Do we have land justice in terms of where we are positioned and what the environmental risk factors we have around us, both those social risk factors of, do we have access to fruits and vegetables? Do we have access to sunshine? Do we have access to space to be able to grow? Are the places that we live, safe and free from harmful, construction materials and all of those things? And so all of that certainly plays into our health overall. And a lot of what we have seen in terms of, people succumbing to this virus has everything to do with the long-term implications of racism, as well as the implications of layering a virus on top of those, that foundation of disparate foundation in the beginning. So absolutely, we need to be mindful of that. And we need to have, I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism and well-earned side eye that we can give to the medical establishment in terms of their relationship with us. I also think that there is a responsibility that they have to be able to provide us with the best of care and to be able to figure out how to provide those things in the time being. So I have taken the personal approach of trying to provide people with factual information and not to persuade them, because I think people will be persuaded to make good decisions for themselves when they have a trusted source of information that they can go to, that they don't feel has an agenda and is not trying to sell them something. And I think right now it feels a lot like people are trying to sell someone on this vaccine. And I think that this is a decision that everybody needs to make for themselves with the right amount of information and really being able to consider where they are. I will say that there are some really promising things we're hearing about the vaccine in terms of how it works, and also some questions that we simply don't know the answers to yet because the vaccine hasn't been around long enough to answer them. And some of those questions are, what are the long-term effects? As has been mentioned already, there already are some mutations of the virus, and the questions become, do those mutations make this virus more infectious? Right now, there are 3 that do seem to indicate that they may enhance transmission of the virus, which could make it it makes it faster to spread, but also it could make it possibly, have a more pronounced response in people in terms of the symptoms and the severity of illness that people experience. The other question, of course, that follows along with that is, are they substantive enough mutations that the vaccine won't work against them? And now people are once again at risk for this virus. And what does that mean for people who now have been immunized and think that they have some level of protection? Other questions we still don't know the answers to are, what impact does the vaccine have on pregnant women, on lactating women, right? We haven't had even any babies born yet from the people who were part of the original, vaccine study to be able to answer those questions. The follow-up time has been just around two to 3 months for people. So this is an emergency authorization. So we don't know that yet. We haven't had very young children involved in masks for a long period of time. So we don't know if adults and children will respond differently to this, especially given where they are in their development. And so all of those are things that we should just be very honest about. Here's what we know and here's what we don't, so that people can make their own decisions. But I am right now very cautious of people yelling, don't get the vaccine, or yelling, do get the vaccine, because I think in both instances, you're trying to persuade people to come to a conclusion instead of giving them the information to help them come to a conclusion about what works best for them and their family and what's in their own best interest in terms of their health.
Okay. Well,
And
since
you used the word persuade a couple of times. I mean, this almost seems like it's going into the mandate territory. I know, instructors, teachers, they're talking about getting back into the school. They've talked to me about being, concerned that they're going to have to take this vaccine to get back into the workforce, the way that we know it. We've heard about traveling, that being a mandate to have the vaccine in order to travel certain places on plane, also to get into venues, sporting venues, or, entertainment venues. Could that be a possibility, that this is a mandated vaccine, or else you're just excommunicated from society?
Mhm.
I think
I
there
would like
certainly is a possibility at some point that there would be legislation. Right now, there have not been major talks about making this mandatory, but I do think there probably will be incentives associated with it. So if you want to travel again, your vaccine will be, a vaccine will be asked of you, or it may even make it easier for you to travel, to try to incentivize people to do that. I have a feeling we are a long ways off, since this vaccine hasn't even been formally approved yet, from actually mandating anything. Remember, we are only under an emergency authorization for this. So this has not been officially approved by the FDA as a vaccine. It is met the criteria for an emergency use authorization. That's it. So they're still collecting data. This is still technically under testing. And so you being able to mandate that somebody gets something that hasn't even been officially approved is just not something that is likely to happen right now. But in the future, could we be thinking about that? Certainly. Most of the way that we've done that has been for travel and for schools. But every day is a new day. And so who knows what may come up in the future.
Mm-hmm. I would like to weigh in on this as well. I think that we will see an attempt to mandate this the very same way we've seen the mandating of the closing down of sectors of the economy, significant sectors of the economy. We've seen the mandating of the wearing of masks in public, despite the lack of evidence that the masks prevent disease. I scoured through the medical literature when I posted up something on social media, and they said, well, this is disinformation. I said, I got you back. And I came back with 10 peer-reviewed medical research articles going back. I think the most recent of them was 2015. So this is long before the idea of the COVID pandemic, creating these emergency use authorization and these mandates, showing that there was a significant amount of dispute that masks, and there were different types of masks they examined, did anything to prevent someone else from infecting me. The best they said that the wearing of masks will prevent a person who is coughing and hacking and spewing from spraying these bacteria and virus-laden droplets into the air. And of course, that's just common sense, which we've known all along. I do think that they are going to attempt to mandate this. I do believe that there is a pharmaceutical medical complex, along with government regulatory agencies and a national security agenda at play here. And if asked to pull that evidence out, I can go all the way back to 1937, 1944, and talk about the evolution of eugenics in America. And I can cite from Gunnar Myrdal's book, where they said in 1994 or 1944 that the desire to get rid of the Black population in America was something that was on the table. And I have documented in numerous books that they have been working on this for many, many years. This goes way beyond just this idea of this vaccine. The last point I'll say on it is there's no way in the world that I will be taking the vaccine. We raised 3 children in our home to complete adulthood with almost perfect health, and they were not vaccinated. There are many people across the country and many physicians who do not quote unquote fully vaccinate their own children. I think that this is an absolute catastrophe, but as Dr. Flo has shared with us, it is the family's informed choice that is the greatest priority from my perspective. I put on the front cover of my book, before you vaccinate, you must investigate. Most people do not.
Wow. Okay. I was actually gonna go to another slide, and we're almost up to the hour. So I guess my question to you first, because we have a whole bunch of questions to go through. Would you two be willing to come back onto the platform at a future date? Is that possible, Dr. Flo and Keidi?
Yeah, as long as my schedule was really open, because I'm actually on vacation right now. Okay. So my schedule gets a little bit more hectic when I get back at work. But I, provided that the scheduling lines up, yeah, sure.
And from my perspective, in service to the community that we're all committed to, I cannot but say yes to your request.
All right. Appreciate it. So I guess we'll go over one more slide. And then, family, we do have the lines open, so you better call up now, because this is going to be an hour show or around there. You know, we're not going to.
You know how we usually go when we have a talk. One leads to another. Finally, we say, "Heck with time. Let's put it on Color People time."
Exactly. So, all right. So let's go. So Keidi, you mentioned eugenics. We might jump around here. So. And Dr. Flo, obviously, if you have some information, please, give us your wisdom. So Margaret Sanger can you well, let me, before we talk about Margaret Sanger, this title of this slide says, can ADOS trust the medical industry? And I know, Keidi, you mentioned some examples, and Dr. Flo as well. But in this particular case, can you give us some information about who Dr. Sanger is?
So Margaret Sanger actually isn't a physician, but she was a reproductive. She was somebody who was active in the reproductive health field in her time, and is considered to be one of the founders of Planned Parenthood. And the controversy with her is that she at many times throughout her life espoused racist, ideas and principles, and those were around some of the, the eugenics of the time. They were around, Black people sort of being undesirable and even potentially, I was gonna say, like, biologically inferior, and so that's really why her name, I think, comes up quite a lot in terms of these conversations, because, like the rest of the medical establishment, she is but a blip in all of the racist things that have happened throughout time, in terms of Black people in America. So, yeah.
All right, Keidi.
May I have your permission to not mince words when I talk about Margaret Sanger's legacy? Okay. Anyone, can I have your permission?
Sure.
Okay, I'll just leave it alone. Margaret Sanger was a very bad person. Very, very bad person. Margaret Sanger was a vicious, rabid racist. And her program, the Negro Project, we have the letters that she wrote to her colleagues who were involved in the Negro Project, was not just eugenics. It went into the territory that we now know as genocide. Now, Margaret Sanger's creation, the Birth Control Society, had a name change when, after World War II, the experience of the Nazi eugenicists so discredited the eugenics movement that they had to go underground. So they changed it to the Planned Parenthood Society. And instead of their eugenicist theme of race improvement through selective breeding, they changed the theme to family planning, giving it a nice, warm, fuzzy makeover. Because they've changed their words, their cruel, genocidal words, to sound sweet and palatable, I make a decision when I talk about Margaret Sanger. I want people to come away with the impression that this was one of the most demonic individuals to live during the 20th century. The fact that she happened to be a woman, and much of what she espoused now being confused as women's rights, makes it all the more necessary that someone like myself, who's studied eugenics movement for 3 decades and more, talk in the most sincere, severe terms about who these people were and what is their ongoing legacy. Every day in America, because of Margaret Sanger's legacy and the eugenicist movement, 849 Black women sacrificed their pregnancy to the altar of abortion. 849 per day on average. And this has been going on for 47 years.
Okay. Well, I was not intending on us having this conversation tonight, but I also want to I feel very strongly that we should not be demonizing Black women in particular, especially because I believe in a reproductive justice framework. And reproductive justice says we have the right to have children, we have the right not to have children, and we have the right to parent the children that we do have. And so that right not to have children is one that I think should be respected under a human rights framework. And so I don't think that Black women should be demonized by anybody for the medical decisions that they make for them and what's in the best interest of their families. And I think we could look at a lot of other things happening in our societies that we could point to as the reason why maybe sometimes people don't feel as if they're able to parent the children that they may be pregnant with. But certainly I don't think that lapping more blame or responsibility or even judgment on Black women is something that I want to stand for or want to be a part of a conversation that is perpetuating. So I just want that to be out there on the record, that I don't think that's a productive conversation, nor do I think that just because there were people who were involved in medicine throughout time who have been racist, that we also have to demonize all of the people who are doing work right now, who are doing work on behalf of communities and providing services to women that are necessary, especially when they're in a time of need. So
if I could just briefly respond, I hope everyone listening heard just how quickly my point of defending African people, Black women, away from defending them from eugenics and genocide was so quickly flipped into the language of demonizing Black women.
Okay. Do you have one?
agree to disagree.
Okay. Well, we definitely have 2 points on that, and both sides are well spoken.
Yeah, I've been in communications all my life, and I've done a lot of study on communications initiatives. So I hear these things in real time, and I'm not afraid to point them out. When we take a honest, sincere statement that someone's making on behalf of the community and flip it around to demonize that person, accusing them of something that they never did do, I have to call that out. I do not stand for it. I've been accused a lot of times. I don't stand for it.
Okay.
And for those of us who, don't know as much on the topic and would want to do our own research and make our own decisions on, either subject, one way or the other, are there any books that you guys could recommend? Anything that we could recommend to do further research on this particular topic?
2 books I would. 1 book and 1 documentary film I highly recommend. Gunnar Myrdal's 1944 tome, An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy. Especially read the chapter on Negro population policy, where they do state the aim to get rid of the Negroes during the middle of the 21st century. And I also recommend a wonderful documentary film. It's highly accessible, which talks about Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement, called Ma'afa 21, Black Genocide in 21st Century America.
Okay.
And I'd recommend Medical Apartheid.
By Harriet Washington. A very good book. The latest printing of it is one of the worst printings of a book I've ever seen. The font is just too small to comfortably read, but it is an excellent book.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, before we get out of here, maybe we can actually talk about the current vaccines that might be available. I know in the U.S., we currently have, and please correct me both, you, Dr. Flo and Dr. Keidi, the Pfizer vaccine and now the Moderna. So, Dr. Flo and Dr. Keidi, can you talk about the Pfizer vaccine currently?
I'm not.
Yeah.
Did you ask for me? I'm sorry.
Oh, either.
Yeah, I'll defer.
So there are two vaccines right now that have emergency use authorization. One is from Pfizer, one is from Moderna. The Pfizer vaccine, it has to be stored at really, really cold temperatures, which is going to make it really challenging for people to be able to get it to more remote areas and things like that. The Moderna one doesn't have the same, cold storage requirements. They both are right now have been seen as being 90 or 95% efficacy, which means that they don't, they protect people in 95% of the instances where they may have run up against the virus. So 95 out of 100 times, they would likely not develop not contract the virus and develop the disease. And of course, we don't know what the long-term efficacy of either of them is. The emergency use authorization for Pfizer came out on December 10th and was approved by the FDA about a day or so later. And for Moderna, just a week later. So just this past Thursday and Friday. So they're in the process of beginning to vaccinate the first people who are on the list of being eligible, which are healthcare professionals. And then they're planning to move to some of the other essential workers, and then eventually to the general population, making it available for people who are interested.
Mm-hmm. I have studied many of these vaccines. There are over 50 in development. 2 have been approved for emergency use authorization. But all of these antibodies, or these antibodies, derived from mouse antibodies. So when we talk about these monoclonal antibodies, I'm going to share with you a paragraph from the paper that I'm reading. Examining the record of use for monoclonal antibody treatment for cardiovascular disorders, researchers Kaponowab and Papalopoulos issued key warnings about unintended immunity responses to these procedures in 2013. They wrote, and I quote, mouse-derived antibodies were initially used in humans. However, patients often developed human anti-mouse antibodies, resulting in rapid antibody clearance and a resultant loss of efficacy and hypersensitivity reactions. We recognize that hypersensitivity reaction is related to what's called immune enhancement. If someone is, say, given a measles vaccine as opposed to acquiring measles antibodies from the mother's colostrum in her breast milk, then if they do then later get measles, it's often called atypical measles, which is a much more aggressive form. All of these vaccines that are being given right now are using mouse-derived monoclonal antibodies. What is in a vaccine? We talk about the pathogen, the culture medium, and the stabilizing agents. All three of them particularly risky. In this case, we have this history going back to as late as 2013 of mouse antibodies triggering an unintended consequence. It's much too risky. In my ideal world, they would put a halt on it all and have all the scientists come above board, get equal access to the media. Some say do, some say don't. I think that both sides need to be heard and given equal forum, and then the families make their choices. I won't be doing it because I study this stuff.
Okay, so I guess Dr. Flo, I know Keidi So Keidi, you did mention some ingredients in the Pfizer vaccine, yes?
Yeah, I'm just really focusing. I mean, all vaccines contain the same three fundamentals: the pathogen to which immunity is being sought, the culture medium, which is a human-like substance from 11 different species, including human diploid cells from aborted fetuses. And to stabilize this putrid mix, they have to use these stabilizing agents, which include a spectrum of antibiotics, thimerosal, and a number of other adjuvants and things. If you used any one of them intravenously on its own, it could hurt you. If I hit you in the head with a hammer, it could hurt you. If I stab you in the back with a knife, it could hurt you. If I shoot you in the belly with a gun, it could hurt you. But in the vaccine protocol, they seem to be suggesting that if I do all three of those to you at the same time, it's going to be good for you.
Okay. Well, Dr. Flo, what specifically is in the Pfizer vaccine that we know of right now?
What specific? You want the list of ingredients?
Yeah, is that available? Is that public?
Yeah, it's absolutely available. It's right on the way you can actually look up the documents. I could pull up the list because I have some of them here. Let's see.
I appreciate it.
I was like, I do not memorize the components of vaccines, so the ingredients list. But give me 1 second.
And I have a question that's kind of along the conspiracy theory lines. I, saw a video posted on social media, someone reading the ingredients on the Pfizer, and it was a lot of it was in medical terms, but she was like, go look it up for yourself. But one of the ingredients they were saying was a like fetus matter from a white infant male that had been used over and over again. They clone it and use it for this vaccine. I mean, it sounded outlandish, but is there any truth to that?
It sounds outlandish.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's outlandish. I don't even know where that would come from.
There is a base there. The whole idea of monoclonal antibodies means they were cloned from a certain central source or similar sources. In this particular case, from my understanding, and the literature points to it, the literature says these monoclonal antibodies are being derived from mouse DNA, mouse being the culture for this plasma from which they clone these antibodies. So I had heard nothing about a white child being the source of this. That sounds like it's going to be difficult to confirm, but we do know the case of Henrietta Lacks, the Black woman who died in 1951 in Johns Hopkins University, extracted her cervical cancer. And so that sounds very similar. So I could understand why people would be concerned. We have this stain of what was done to Henrietta Lacks that hovers over all of us. Most of us adults probably carry fragments of her DNA.
Yes, because HeLa cells have been used for a lot of things over time. And they're named after her, the first two initials of her first and last name. So in terms of the ingredients list, the list has potassium chloride, monobasic potassium, phosphate, sodium chloride, dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate, and sucrose, in addition to lipids. And so there are 4 lipids, including cholesterol, that are included as the base ingredients. So the vaccine doesn't have any preservatives as we would typically think of in them, but those are essentially the ingredients of the vaccine.
Okay. And do we have any idea if this is supposed to be a one and done type of vaccine?
2 doses.
Well, I know that there's 2 doses initially, but is it after that? Is it going to be like the chicken pox where you don't have to get it, or?
We don't know. We have no clue as of yet because it hasn't been around long enough. So we don't know what immunity might be conferred beyond a few months. So that's part of why, like I said, this is an emergency use authorization, because we don't have enough information to actually it hasn't been around long enough and tested to be able to get the full approval from the FDA of a typical vaccine. So this is being launched as an emergency use vaccine because it's met the protocol that they consider for emergency use, which is that there has to be a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear agent that can cause serious or life-threatening disease. It has to be reasonable to believe that the product may be effective to prevent, diagnose, or treat such a life-threatening disease. The known potential benefits of the product have to outweigh the known and potential risks of the product, and that there's not an adequate, approved, and available alternative for addressing the condition. Those are the criteria that the FDA uses to be able to decide whether or not an emergency use authorization would be allowable. So they're arguing that it meets those criteria, and therefore that's why it has the emergency use authorization as even being eligible for that. Something that already had a known way to be able to treat it likely wouldn't be able to get emergency use because it wouldn't meet that criteria.
Okay. And then my last question for the night will be...
And could I just briefly respond to that?
Oh, certainly.
When we talk about the idea of one and done, or in this case, 2 and done, what about the annual flu vaccine? How come it doesn't confer in permanent immunity? So the idea that the pharmaceutical medical drug complex would do a one and done is just, I'm sorry, I'm cynical. It's just too much money. Too much money to be made. They're not going to pass that up.
There are other vaccines, though, that we do get that are one and done. And so the flu vaccine is different in part because the flu shifts and drifts on a regular basis. And so those changes make it so that it's similar to the reason why we don't have a vaccine for the common cold, because it mutates so quickly and there are so many different strains and they become dominant at different times. And so they are the ones that are commonly spread, and that changes over time. So it's really difficult to be able to have a stable vaccine for the common cold, for example. With the flu, the same thing is happening. Every year, people are guessing in February what's going to be the dominant few strains in the following fall, given how the virus has mutated throughout the year and what they're expecting. And sometimes they guess well, and the vaccine is protective, and sometimes they guess incorrectly, and the vaccine doesn't work very well. But that's part of the reason why, is that the flu is changing constantly. So viruses differ, which is how we kind of started this conversation. There are some that don't mutate nearly as often, and others that mutate very frequently. And those that mutate the most frequently are the hardest to come up with a vaccine for, because we use these terms like cancer or like virus, right? But then there are lots of mutations that exist. When we think about cancers, there are different sites and they grow at different paces, and they are truly hundreds of different manifestations that are using one umbrella term. And so the question remains to be seen if if this virus is going to be similar to some of the ones that do confer lifetime immunity, like measles or, polio or things like that, or if this is going to be one of the ones where we have to be inoculated more often because it changes often, or because the immunity wears off, as is the case with things like tetanus and diphtheria and pertussis. So we just don't know yet.
Okay, so your question and your answer answered my question. That's what I wanted to know, why sometimes like the measles, we just get one shot, it's done, and sometimes it's over and over and over again, like with the flu.
Yeah, it doesn't mutate nearly, and mutations aren't all created equal either. So some viruses can mutate, but the mutations are really small and they're kind of inconsequential. And other times the mutations are quite big and they change how likely it is that the virus can be spread in populations, how deadly it is, and they're substantive enough that you're not conferred immunity by the antibodies from a different strain of that same virus.
All right, Kim, you have any more questions before we wrap it up?
I have a ton of questions, but that we're gonna have to save that for a different time. But this discussion has definitely, led me on the path to do my own research and make my own informed decisions.
Well, before we go, family, I want to post this, and I don't know if everybody can see this. I'm gonna remove this here. Let's go. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Kim, can you is there any way that we could remove us and just show the background?
Just show the background. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let me see.
I don't know
if I have those controls.
I don't know if we could do that. Let's see. And if not, here, I'm going to put this up real quick. I'm going to upload it. Thanks, everyone, for the patience, but I think this is definitely worth the wait. All right. So I wanted to
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Even with that, things are changing. I had a small group, very small group, very social distance, following all the protocols, got me a cake today. And I'm like, yeah, we don't blow out candles anymore. I should have brought my fan. But I did use some napkins to blow them out. And they're like, oh, we can't even blow out birthday candles anymore. This COVID sucks.
Hey, stay forever young and live to your most extraordinary imagination, a beautiful life. Congratulations.
Well, thank you everybody so much.
Yes, thank you. And we're definitely going to have this conversation once again, hopefully in the near future, but sometime in the future as these vaccines start coming out. There was so many questions that we definitely had that eventually, hopefully, we'll be able to ask, and you two will be able to come on to this platform and answer in your best ability. At that note, I guess, Dr. Flo, is there anything else that you would like to give to the people? And then Keidi will also like to hear you as well.
No, I really thank you for having me on and for having this conversation. I think it's important that people get some solid information and know where to look for additional resources. I think it's totally appropriate to have a healthy dose of skepticism. And again, I would encourage people to just make sure that, you understand how these things work so that you're not making decisions based off of, misunderstandings or misperceptions, but you're actually making decisions based on your understanding of what's happening, what those what the pros are, what are the things you stand to gain, and also what are the risks, right? And I think it's a good you need to have a good balance of understanding those. We make those decisions every day, right? And what we're going to eat, and where we're going to like all of these decisions we make have consequences, and they have pros and cons. And so the hope is that you have all the information so you can weigh those and decide honestly what decisions are best in terms of how to protect you and your family. And if there are things that we don't know yet that make you uncomfortable, it's okay to be able to say, I'm not ready to make that decision. And if there are things that, we do know that make you feel comfortable, it's okay to make the decision. I think it's really important that people make a choice that's good for them.
Okay. Do you have any, or do you want to feel like you can give out your contact information where people can reach you, or do you think?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, in my title below, you can find me on Twitter at Flojaune, Flojaune, and feel free to send me a direct message or hit me up there. And I'll be sharing more information as we move through this thing about what we know and what we don't. And and that's probably the best way to find me and to keep up.
All right, appreciate you. Thank you very much. Keidi, yourself?
A spectrum of minimally regulated and extraordinary pharmacological procedures has created an unprecedented environment for the potential emergence of the most dangerous infectious pathogens to have ever affected humans and other species. Currently propagated across a large global environment are procedures such as gene editing, gain of function experiments, monoclonal immune therapy, the use of non-human species in vaccine cultures, mutagenic chemotherapies, antibiotic-resistant pathogens, and other modern medical therapeutic approaches. It seems inevitable that these procedures, in unusual combinations, raise the specter of unintended and highly aggressive pathogenic mutations. The world's current microbiological regulatory environment is inadequate to prevent spontaneous mutation of new pathogenic species of infectious superbugs of the future. Under a worst scenario outcome, this could lead to the world's 6th extinction level event. That is the danger that we face. I have 2 books I want to recommend that people go check me out on the internet at keidi.biz, KEI.biz. The book Panic: What the Coronavirus Pandemic Tells Us About the State of the World, as well as my most recent book, which Moya, I don't know if you and I have discussed this book, Fade to Black: The Passing of a Great Race, which unfortunately, using scientific futurism, I forecast that African Americans have 45 more years left before we disappear.
All right. Well, Keidi, where can people reach you in addition to
KEIDI.biz is the website. You can always email me, Keidi at chefkeidi.com, where we have the information, of course, on our living superfood and how you can supercharge your immune system to defend yourself against these superbugs of the future.
And that's at what, livingsuperfood.com, is that correct?
Livingsuperfood.com, chefkeidi.com will take you to the same destination. You know, I think I only have 28, maybe 29 websites. So just put my name up, 5 letters, put it in the search engine. It'll probably be the first hit.
Okay. All right. So I don't really have anything else to say, but I want to thank you, Dr. Flo and Dr. Keidi, for coming through.
Again, I'm not a doctor. I usually try and avoid people putting that term on me because I know doctors qualify. They work real hard for that. And I also don't want to be confused with iatrogenics, which means death by doctor.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. That was totally my bad. I was just like going doctor crazy right now. My bad. All right. So Chef Keidi.
We can call Kim doctor on her birthday, doc.
All right, cool. Yeah, Kim, if there's anything else you want to take us out.
All right, I will take us out of here, and I just want everybody to stay safe and sane and enjoy your holiday. Christmas coming up, and like I said, stay safe, stay sane.